Now, Rowan, you are a professional actor. You have the ability to play a role, to convince people of stuff. I find it very convincing. So, now, I saw this Ricky Gervais movie, The Invention of Lying. Has anyone seen that? All right. Now, when I watched this movie, interesting movie, it's about this character. His name is Mark, and in Mark's world, no one can lie. Everyone has to tell the blunt truth. That's just the way it goes, except for Mark. Now, Mark uses this to great advantage to get ahead at the publishing firm. He rewrites the history of the world. It becomes a bestseller. But the movie really comes to a climax as he consoles his dying mother in the hospital bed. We're going to take a look at a 3-minute clip from this, and then I'll get your thoughts. Thanks. There you go. Now, it's pretty subtle if you missed the point there, but, but the point is that belief in an afterlife is nothing more than a projection. It's a wish fulfillment. It's an act that we put on to deal with dying. What's your thoughts, mate?
Yes, well, very subtle indeed, Dave. Very subtle. It's just a subtle swipe in there at Christianity, anybody else who believes in heaven. Well, that scene there just expands upon the criticisms of Freud and Marx, who have already labelled heaven as nothing more than wish fulfillment. It's just an escapist fantasy. That is an old argument, and it is a very common argument. But both Freud and Marx, and in this instance, Ricky Gervais, they are all ardent atheists. And since they are atheists, they have already subscribed to what Bruce was talking about, hardcore materialism as the ultimate form of truth. Therefore, they are just as susceptible to the wish fulfillment argument as anybody else. I mean, if I had assumed that the universe is all there is and ever will be, then I certainly wouldn't want there to be anything there after I die. I mean, it would be an inconvenient truth if there was. So that's one part of it. The other thing is that, and this is the funny one, which really gets me, and I can't believe Marx missed this. Some cultures, like in South American tribes, they have afterlives where one wouldn't always wish to go. For example, those South American tribes that I was alluding to just then, some of them only believe in a hell. There is no heaven. And that's a place that I wouldn't really want to go. So, the wish fulfillment argument is pretty much patently invalid. But hey, say what you want, heaven is still just a crutch. How many of us have heard that one before? Well, yes. I would not deny the fact that a heaven would act as a crutch to a species whose inevitable and ultimate destination is death. But if you walked up to a paraplegic in a wheelchair and pointed at the wheelchair and said, "You're just using that as a crutch, so it can't be real," well then that paraplegic, as well as everybody else in the world, would question your sanity. Yes, the wheelchair is acting as a crutch. Nonetheless, it still exists, and you're a cripple. The real question here is whether or not you have reason to believe that wheelchair exists. Christians believe in the existence of a heaven because we have sufficient reason to arrive at that conclusion, not because we need it to be there. And I can't put it any better than C.S. Lewis, who quipped wonderfully, "If you think that my claim to have a large balance in my bank account is due purely to wishful thinking, it might be a good idea first to find out whether or not I actually have a bank account." He's a brilliant man. And then we must question why the idea of a heaven or an afterlife is such a common theme across the entire history of humanity. The majority of humanity's cultures across history have referenced or believed in a heaven. The ancient Egyptians, they dedicated an entire book to the subject, the Book of the Dead. They constructed enormous pyramids to facilitate their pharaoh's journey through to the afterlife. For the enlightened Hindu soul, you will enter the pleasurable paradise of Swargaloka. For Polynesians and Mesoamericans, they have multi-tiered or multi-leveled heavens. And then for Valhallans, the Vikings, the dead Vikings, as we saw before, you have Valhalla. It's just one room, it's one building, an entire hall filled with beer, weapons, food. And suddenly all the blokes are going, "Yeah, should probably start worshipping Odin." Yeah, you also. But historically speaking, the majority of humanity has believed in a heaven. This in itself is not proof of a heaven, but it does make one wonder why we as humans are just so obsessed with this idea of ongoing life. And that there is such a critical question and something that's really fascinating. How on earth, NDEs aside, Shardy, have we as humans come to believe that we may continue to live onwards at all, somewhere, after we die? I mean, the idea of an afterlife isn't exactly verifiable, since if you're there, you can't report back in. Consider the fact that the majority of our basic needs have require some level of fulfillment. If you're hungry, you eat. If you're sleepy, you sleep. If you're thirsty, you drink. The list goes on. Likewise, humans love to exist, and we crave the things that life has gifted us, those wonderful experiences that life gifted us. Because death separates us from those things, all humans, even the non-religious, share the mutual feeling that death is fundamentally wrong. Could it be this very feeling that indicates to us that we aren't intended for some be-all or end-all to our existence? Christians and Christianity would say, yes, we aren't intended for death. So all in all, you must show that a man is wrong before you start explaining why he's wrong. Now, funny as that sounds, the current trend is to assume that someone is wrong and then assume that without any discussion, and then distract them from that by busily explaining how they became so silly. Now, this is just bad reasoning, and it does happen. So if the wish fulfillment argument is patently invalid, if crutches can exist in themselves and death is at odds with the majority of human values, I would say that those are at least some good points of evidence for an afterlife or heaven. And since we have evidence, it is nonsense to say heaven doesn't exist because you wish it exists.
Thanks, Rowan. Well answered. I appreciate that.